All right, let's dive into something I know you've been wanting to get into. The Six Nations Rugby Tournament.
Okay.
But more specifically, uh, why this tournament holds such a global reputation. Like why the prestige seems to rival even something like the Rugby World Cup.
Yeah.
To help us break this down, we've got two sources here. We have your own notes from January 22nd of this year. And we also have this article featuring a former All Blacks player,
Okay.
Justin Marshall. And he has some pretty strong opinions about this whole thing. So, starting off, you might be thinking, well, doesn't the Southern Hemisphere dominate the Rugby World Cup?
Yeah.
And you would be right. But there's this argument that the Six Nations holds a really special place. Some even say it surpasses the Rugby Championship. So where do we even begin with this?
Well, let's look at the history. The Six Nations goes all the way back to 1883,
Wow.
making it over a century older
Right.
than the Rugby Championship, which only started in 1996.
Yeah, that's a huge difference. In my notes here, you mentioned the vibe of the Six Nations as like a big factor in its prestige. What did you mean by that?
It's like stepping back in time. You're not just watching a game. You're experiencing over a century of tradition and rivalries, like legendary moments.
Okay.
It's a unique atmosphere, like a connection to the past that newer tournaments don't have. For example, before every match, they do the national anthems, and the crowd joins in and sings along with this passion. It's powerful. It shows the emotional weight of the tournament.
I see. So we've got the history, we've got this almost tangible atmosphere.
Yeah.
But how does all that equal prestige, especially for someone who isn't a hardcore rugby fan?
Well, prestige isn't all about winning. It's also about the impact, the legacy, and global recognition. And the Six Nations has all of that. It's covered all over the world, attracting millions of viewers.
Wow.
And the money coming in through sponsorships.
Right.
It solidifies it as a major sporting event. Also, the tournament is relatively short, only 6 weeks.
Right.
So there's this concentrated period of excitement that captures the attention of fans around the world.
Okay, I can see that. But what about the rugby itself? How does the style of play in the Six Nations compare to, let's say, the Rugby Championship?
Well, that's an interesting question. Well, the Six Nations is known for it's a more tactical style, forward-oriented. They emphasize physicality and set pieces,
Okay.
like scrums and lineouts.
Right.
And this is partially due to the weather in Europe.
During the tournament.
Yes. It can be wet and muddy, which makes it harder for those running games.
So it's a bit more of a strategic battle then, like a chess match on the field.
Exactly. But don't get me wrong, it's still exciting. The Six Nations has those hard-hitting tackles and clever maneuvers.
Right.
And the players have this intensity, fueled by those historic rivalries.
Speaking of the rivalries, my notes mentioned they are pretty intense. And that article with Justin Marshall, he really emphasized that as well.
Absolutely. He actually says, form goes out the door, it's all about that intense rivalry.
No.
These aren't just games, they are battles for national pride, fueled by centuries of competition on and off the field.
Could you give us an example? What's one of the most heated rivalries?
Well, you can't talk rivalries without mentioning Le Crutch. England versus France. It's a clash of styles and cultures. Rugby philosophies.
Okay.
England, the disciplined side. Against France, the unpredictable team. The matches are always fiercely contested, and the history just adds another layer of intensity.
Yeah, you can't beat that history. And speaking of history, my notes mentioned England and Scotland having the oldest rivalry in rugby.
That's right, dating back to 1871, the first ever international rugby match.
Wow.
And over the years, it's become this symbol of the historical and cultural ties between those two nations.
So even if you don't know rugby that well, you can still appreciate the history and the emotions.
Absolutely. That's one of the things that make it so captivating. It's a sense of national identity, a shared history that transcends the sport itself.
And you know, it's not just about the men's tournament. The Women's Six Nations is gaining incredible momentum, showcasing some of the best rugby in the world.
That's a great point. It adds another dimension, further expanding its reach and impact.
Right.
It's bringing in new fans, inspiring young athletes, and challenging traditional notions.
Of what it means to be a rugby player.
Exactly.
It's like the Six Nations is a constantly evolving story.
Yeah.
But going back to those rivalries, Justin Marshall said something about Welsh fans, that they sold out games even when their team was on a massive losing streak.
Yeah. He uses that as an example to highlight the dedication, the loyalty of the fans. Even when their team is struggling, they show up in huge numbers, creating that electric atmosphere.
Wow.
And they demonstrate the deep-rooted passion around this tournament.
So even if your team isn't winning, you're still there to be a part of it, to be part of the history, the tradition. It's
Mhm.
more than just the final score.
Exactly. And that unwavering support adds to the prestige. It shows that it's more than just a series of games, it's a cultural event, a celebration of national identity, and a shared passion.
It sounds like these rivalries really create a unique energy, like a sense of occasion you wouldn't find elsewhere.
Exactly. It's contagious. Even
Yeah.
if you aren't a diehard fan, you get swept up in the excitement.
Okay, so we have this long history, these incredibly intense rivalries. But rugby isn't exactly a global sport like soccer. So how does the Six Nations manage to capture attention worldwide? I mean, it seems to have a wider reach than you might expect.
That's where it gets really interesting. The Six Nations, it has this uncanny ability to capture the imagination, like you said in your notes. It's like a window into this world of tradition and passion and fierce competition.
Yeah.
Even if you don't get all the rules, you can feel the intensity, the history, the
I
drama.
guess it's kind of like you don't have to be a baseball fanatic to appreciate the World Series.
Exactly. There are those events that just transcend the sport itself. They become these cultural moments,
Hmm.
global events that people want to be a part of. And the Six Nations, with its history and atmosphere, definitely fits that bill.
Okay. I'm starting to see how it's built such a strong reputation. But both your notes and Justin Marshall make a pretty bold claim. They say the Six Nations is second only to the Rugby World Cup in terms of prestige,
Mhm.
even surpassing the Rugby Championship. That's going to be a tough pill to swallow for some fans in the Southern Hemisphere.
Marshall himself admits it's a bitter pill in the article.
Mm.
But remember, he's a former All Black, someone who's played at the highest level in both hemispheres. So
Okay.
his perspective carries some weight.
So why would he say that? What makes the Six Nations so special?
Well, think back to what we talked about, the history, the rivalries, the atmosphere. Those elements contribute to the prestige. It's not just about winning or losing. It's the entire experience.
So it's about the cultural significance, the emotional connection.
Exactly. And Marshall, having played in both, has probably experienced that firsthand.
Hmm.
He understands that allure of the Six Nations, how it captures people.
Hmm. That's interesting. It makes me think about how the tournament works. For those who aren't familiar, can you explain how the Six Nations actually works?
Sure. So it's a round-robin tournament, which means each team plays every other team once. And the team with the most points at the end of the 5 rounds wins the championship.
Okay.
Points are awarded for wins, draws, and for scoring a certain number of tries, which are like touchdowns.
Right, right. And what about those bonus points?
Ah, yes, bonus points. They add another layer of strategy. A team can get a bonus point by scoring 4 or more tries in a match, regardless of whether they win or lose. And they can get another one for losing by 7 points or fewer.
Wow, so even if you're losing.
Yes, every match matters. Every point counts.
Interesting. Now, thinking back to that claim about prestige, I have a question for you, listener. If you could only attend one, a Six Nations match or a rugby championship match, which would you choose? It's a tough choice, isn't it? And I think that speaks volumes about the appeal of both.
Yeah. The Rugby Championship might have a higher level of skill, but the Six Nations offer something else.
Right.
Something more intangible.
We've talked about the history, the rivalries,
Mm-hmm.
the global appeal. But Marshall also mentioned something else in the article. He mentioned how even teams like Wales, who have been struggling, can still sell out their home games just because of the prestige of the Six Nations. What does that say about the tournament?
That's a fantastic point. It shows that the Six Nations isn't just about the rugby itself. It's about being part of something bigger than any one team or season.
Like a cultural event?
Exactly. And that's what makes it so unique. You could argue that the Rugby Championship has a higher level of play, but the Six Nations, it offers something more, something that transcends the sport.
You can feel the history, the passion, the intensity, even if you don't know all the rules.
You hit the nail on the head. It's like the Super Bowl or the World Series. They capture the imagination.
Okay, so we've established that the Six Nations is a big deal, but let's get back to that bold claim. Is it really the second most prestigious rugby tournament in the world? I mean, how do you even measure prestige?
It's a claim that definitely sparks debate. Marshall, coming from the Southern Hemisphere, he acknowledges that it's a bitter pill to swallow for those fans,
Right.
but he argues that the Six Nations consistently delivers these captivating stories and thrilling matches and unforgettable moments that resonate with audiences worldwide.
What makes his perspective so compelling, though?
Well, think about his experience. He's played at the highest level of rugby in both hemispheres. He's seen the differences. And his conclusion is that the Six Nations, Even if it doesn't always have the highest level of play, it offers something unique and valuable.
I think that elevates it.
Precisely. It's the combination of history, tradition, and rivalries. It's the atmosphere, the passion, the sense of occasion.
So it's not just what happens on the field, but the entire experience.
Exactly. And that's why Marshall
Mhm.
and many others would argue that it deserves that second-place ranking.
Ahead of the Rugby Championship.
Yes.
You know, this conversation has really opened my eyes.
It is fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah. We're uncovering layers.
Like peeling back an onion.
Right.
Revealing the complexity.
So what really sets it apart? What makes it stand out from the others? It's interesting. The article doesn't really compare it to, like, the Rugby Championship in terms of, like, playing styles.
That's right. The focus is more on those intangible things.
Okay.
The history, the tradition, the rivalries, those things that can't be measured in points or tries, but they contribute so much.
So the Six Nations, it's less about athletic prowess or more about national pride.
Exactly. That's what makes it so compelling, even for casual fans.
It's like a historical drama.
Yeah.
Each match is a new chapter.
That's a great analogy.
So we've established that the Six Nations is prestigious. It has this rich history and these intense rivalries, and the global appeal goes beyond the sport. But what's your takeaway? What resonates with you the most?
Is it the history, the passion of the fans, the idea that a tournament can transcend the sport?
Or maybe it's something else entirely. Maybe you want to watch a match now and experience the atmosphere.
Whatever it is, I hope this deep dive has given you a new appreciation for the Six Nations.
Absolutely. This is just the beginning of your exploration. There's so much more out there.
So go ahead, dive in, and let us know what you find.
Great advice. Now, let's recap what we've learned. We started by examining the history, comparing it to the Rugby Championship. We talked about the structure of the tournament, that round-robin format.
We delved into the rivalries, how they fuel the passion. We talked about England versus France and England and Scotland.
And we can't forget about the global appeal.
We discussed how it transcends the sport, becoming a cultural event.
And finally, we talked about that claim, that the Six Nations is the second most prestigious.
Right. We looked at it from Justin Marshall's perspective.
So there you have it, a whirlwind tour of the Six Nations. But don't worry, there's more to come.
In our next segment, we'll delve deeper into the cultural significance. We'll explore how it's evolved over time.
We'll also talk about the money behind it all. And we'll take a closer look at the individual nations.
So stay tuned for more on the world of Six Nations rugby.
So we've covered a ton about the Six Nations, but in your notes, you mentioned the business side of things. What did you mean?
Well, rugby's a global business, and the Six Nations is a big part of that.
Right.
The money involved, it affects everything, from player salaries to broadcasting deals.
It makes you wonder how they balance that, like the commercial side of things, with the traditions of the tournament.
It's a tricky balance. They've managed to get lucrative deals for broadcasting and sponsorships, but they make sure it aligns with the tournament's image.
So it's not just about the money.
No, they're being strategic. They know they need financial stability for the future, but they also want to protect its legacy. It's a tough act, but they've done well so far.
Okay, that's good to hear. You also mentioned Italy joining the Six Nations back in 2000. That was a pretty big deal.
It was. The goal was to expand the tournament and help rugby grow in Italy, but not everyone was happy.
Yeah, some people said it would weaken the competition. What happened?
Well, Italy has had some struggles competing with those more established nations.
Right.
But it's given Italian players valuable experience and led to more investment in Italian rugby.
So maybe a positive overall for the growth of the sport.
That's one way to look at it.
Okay, now, what about the teams themselves? They each bring something different to the tournament, right?
Absolutely. It's like a tapestry woven from history, culture, and pride.
I like that. So where should we start?
Well, you have to talk about England, the birthplace of rugby. They have this powerful, forward-dominated style,
Okay.
and their rivalry with France, the crunch, it's one of the fiercest.
England, always a strong team.
Yeah.
But maybe they feel the pressure sometimes.
Yeah, maybe. Then there's Ireland. They've been playing really well. A fast, expansive game.
It's amazing to see how they've grown.
They have some incredible players.
Right.
And their rivalry with England, it's always a big one.
Who else?
Wales. They're known for their passionate fans and their ability to create those magical moments. It's their rugby heritage.
Wales, the underdogs with a fighting spirit.
And then Scotland, so close to greatness, but they struggle to win it all. Their rivalry with England goes back to the very first match. It's always a spectacle.
Scotland, they never give up.
And France, They are flair and unpredictability. Brilliant one minute, frustrating the next,
Yeah.
but always entertaining.
France. You never know what to expect.
And of course, we can't forget Italy.
Right.
They bring so much passion, even if they haven't been as successful.
Italy. Giving it their all, they've earned respect. Talking about these teams makes me think about all the legendary players.
Yes, like Brian O'Driscoll, Johnny Wilkinson, Gareth Edwards. They're icons. They left their mark on the tournament.
So, what have we learned about the Six Nations?
We've explored everything, from its history to its finances.
The rivalries, the cultures, the teams.
It's a captivating spectacle.
But the most important thing is that it's more than just a tournament. It's a cultural phenomenon. It's about national pride and the power of sport.
It reminds us that even in a changing world, some things stay the same. The passion, the rivalries, the camaraderie, that's what makes it special.
And that's why it will continue to captivate us.
Years to come.
As you watch the Six Nations, don't just watch, experience it.
Immerse yourself.
In the atmosphere, the rivalries, the history.
This has been The Deep Dive, your shortcut to being well-informed. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.